Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Brooks Memorial Library. It's great to see you all here. This year's festival is presented by the Downtown Brattleboro Alliance, and it is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, Arch Capital, the Howard Family Foundation, Tim Mayo, the Thompson Trust, the Vermont Humanities Council, Vermont Public Radio, and Bob and Ann Works. And Ann Beattie's presence here is particularly sponsored by the Friends of Brooks Memorial Library. We would also like to thank our advertisers and encourage you to support them. The festival is run entirely by volunteers, but has very real expenses. So we encourage you to make a donation to one of the donation boxes sometime today. This is the last of the presentations in the festival. There is no flash photography or recording. Please take a moment now to turn off the ringer on your cell phone. Please do. I was at the theater last night, and after a long announcement about cell phones, the person behind me, their cell phone was ringing, ringing, ringing. Terrible. What a world we live in, eh? Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce Ann Beattie to you. I remember waiting to read Ann's stories in the New Yorker in the 70s and 80s. There was something about them that captured the time I was living in, the people I was hanging out with, the anxiety and absurdity and irony of what we were feeling and doing. Turned out, Ann was the freshman lit teacher of my partner, Todd, at the University of Connecticut, and he just happens to be here this evening.
So I told Ann I can't help myself. I have to tell an anecdote or two. At 18, I was following Ann Beattie around. At 18, I was following Ann Beattie around like a puppy dog. I had never gotten a C- on a paper in my life, and I was able to earn a B, which was a major accomplishment. I came back to see her at UConn. Well, I sat in the front row every time she came back to UConn to give a reading, because the way she read, the way she discussed literature, opened it up in a different way than I had ever experienced before. So about 20 years ago, I called Ann and was so happy to hear her voice on her voicemail. I said, oh my God, still the same voice. Would you please come and do a benefit reading at our house for the Brattleboro Area AIDS Project? And I was your pet student back then. And she very sweetly called back and said, I'd be very happy to do the reading. I can't promise I remember you, but I'll be there. Well, she came down the driveway, got up, stood up out of her car and said, I hoped it was you. I hoped it was you. So since then, we've been Richard and Ann and her husband Lincoln and I have become very close. We are in touch regularly, and I am so delighted to have her back, and I know you will enjoy her reading.
Ann is the author of 10 short story collections, including State of Maine, her newest, 8 novels, including Mrs. Nixon, A Novelist Imagines a Life, and the novella Walks with Men. Her first novel, Chilly Scenes of Winter, was made into a major motion picture. Her other works include the children's book Spectacles, which deals with the supernatural, and Alex Katz, a collection of essays in art criticism. Ann has been included in 4 O. Henry Award collections, in John Updike's The Best American Short Stories of the Century, and in Jennifer Egan's The Best American Short Stories 2014. In 2000, she received the Penn Malamud Award for Achievement in the Short Story. In 2005, she received the Ray Award for the short story. She was the Edgar Allan Poe Professor of Literature and Creative Writing at the University of Virginia, and I just love that chair's name. She is member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters and of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. She and her husband, Lincoln Perry, who is a fantastic painter, by the way, live in Maine and Key West, Florida. Ladies and gentlemen, Ann Beattie.
Thank you very much for having me. I was going to ask if you could hear me, but I can hear myself. It sounds like I'm in an octopus's garden. Does it sound as weird to you as it does to me? It sounds all right to you? That's the important thing, I guess. Okay. Let me know if at any point you can't hear me. So what I'm going to do today is read a couple of stories, both of them fairly short, from my new collection, which is called The State We're In, Maine Stories. The publisher made me subtitle it. You probably think Vermont's cool, but New York City thinks Maine is cool. You're like off the map to them. It's only the Northeast Kingdom to them. There's no other part of the state. So I will read a couple of stories and take some questions afterwards. And thank you again for having me. Thank you for the nice introduction. It's supposed to be here. Okay. This story is called The Fledgling. Does this even pertain to a microscope? No, just a stand for it. You see, I'm so habituated. It's like, this is going to do something for me. But, yeah, this is my life with inanimate objects. It's really not good, okay. The Fledgling. She was hurrying out of the house, late for an appointment, purse slung over one shoulder, canvas shopping bag in her hand. A squawk came from the oak tree. Somewhere nearby, a car backfired, but the squawking bird wasn't silenced. It flew down one branch and sat at the tip of another, weighing it down, continuing to make the sound, less a squawk than a piercing cry. The flapping of wings stopped her. Was the bird dive-bombing her or just having an awkward moment? It flew back into the tree and sat again on a lower branch. Then she heard the second sound, the little sound, the curious tinkle of wind chimes, though she did not have wind chimes, thinking them obnoxious. But it was unmistakably the sound of glass rattling. You could hardly hear it above what were now three noisy birds, medium-sized, common birds of ordinary color she should have known the name of. But if they weren't cardinals or mourning doves, she didn't know birds' names. Well, she knew a grackle when she saw one. Recently, flying squirrels had gotten into the attic and multiplied like crazy. The animal control guy going up every day on the ladder to check the traps until 17 of them were caught. The mother, then the only remaining baby, old enough to go to college and drink beer if it had been human, were the last to go. They were billed by the day. Birds, what's happening here? Might a storm be on the way? Tinkle, tinkle, then nothing. One more bird flying into the tree, two of the three already lifting off, one landing on the lawn and making the sound over and over, standing there in the grass. No more tinkling sound, no more pseudo-wind chime susurration, but really, how dumb could she be? It was there, in the blue recycling bin, still filled with wine bottles, seltzer bottles, milk containers, a crushed Budweiser can she'd picked up out of the road. They were not the sort to drink Budweiser the day before. Also in the recycling bin, where dirty water pooled in a corner, was a tiny fledgling, every now and then beating its wings futilely, voicing an almost silent burble. Right there in the dark water that was probably mostly rainwater, mixed with a bit of undrunk red wine, a splash of Coke that leaked out when the can was tossed, the little bird just looked like an animated piece of crap, its nondescript color that of sludge, some pollen dusting the tops of the bottles and cans, a small fallen branch across one corner, like those old-fashioned picture darts her mother used to lick to stick her baby pictures in an album. There had been hundreds of them, but the photographic record fizzled out pretty much where it should have, with her, knobby-kneed, pigtailed and ribboned, on the steps outside the building where she went to kindergarten. You weren't supposed to touch birds because they wouldn't be allowed back in the nest, right? If you got your human smell on them? Or was that an old wives' tale? Were there still old wives who told tales, or did everyone know everything now, including how to remove red wine stains, how to make your tablecloth soft, how to keep salt from getting moist in the container? Oh, it was a world of rice now, very little ingested because quinoa was so popular. That and tabbouleh and spelt, though rice grains were still put in salt shakers. Rice was still thrown at weddings, certain weddings. Poor little dirty, sad, frightened bird. Poor distraught elders. They all feared the worst scenario, death by drowning. death by starvation, an ugly end with no one but them as witnesses, and they could do nothing except send up a storm of sound and hope either the gods or the humans who acted like gods would do the right thing, that one of them would be the savior. She was obviously that, staring nervously for only a few seconds before dropping everything, checking her impulse to plunge in her hand, running inside for the oven mitts, guaranteed to be safe for food cooked up to 450 degrees. Into the house she ran, out of the house she ran, hands in mitts, but she didn't want to crush it. It was so small, so sodden. The skin of its tiny head looked like the crow's feet fanning out from the corners of her eyes. The birds were making a terrible sound, two on the ground as if facing off with her, yet much too far away. Two others, sitting high up in the tree, were making the loudest noise. She was capable of reaching in, even though the mitts made the use of her hands awkward, to say the least, and lifting out the little thing and putting it on the walkway where she hoped all traces of Roundup were gone from the spraying done by the lawn service to keep weeds from sprouting in the sand between bricks. Maybe put it on the grass, though it looked like it would need all the traction it could get. What was the scenario? She could retreat to the house or go to the car and turn on the AC and watch in her rearview mirror to see mother birds swoop down and, however she did it, enfold baby birds somehow and lift it again to the nest which she imagined she saw, either that or some dead leaves, mid-tree. Well, it was nature. It would work out. Of course it would. She kept focusing on the near future because the little bird was cupped in her oven mitts now, when suddenly she remembered something she had forgotten for most of her life. It was a poem that began, "Goodbye, little fledgling, fly away." Her grandmother, who'd been such a good baker, had placed in the center of her famous apple pies made with 3 kinds of apples a little black bird with an open beak, a pie bird to release steam. A simplified version of a bird, a little objet, the clever baker's secret to a perfect pie. It was standing there. It was either shivering or trying to move its wet wings. It could have died in the recycling. What if she'd hurried on, thought the happy birds were just voicing their happy songs? Both birds had now flown from the lawn back into the tree. One kept flying up and landing exactly where it had started from. Surely it had a plan? The little bird was slightly lopsided. It made a motion resembling a hop. It opened its beak and made a slightly louder sound than it had made in the blue plastic recycling container, which seemed to alarm it and make it tilt farther sideways. She was overstaying her welcome. Car plan. She scooped up her purse and bag, still wearing the cumbersome silver oven mitts. That was the way she looked as she emerged from under the bower of wisteria, making it a point not to torture herself by looking back, and greeted the man in the open-doored mail truck, only slightly surprised to have come upon her looking the way she did, rather frantic, breathing heavily, her hands like lobster claws immobilized by thick rubber bands. Regardless of her grandmother's lessons and always gently delivered advice, she'd never made a pie in her life. Thank you. I did put down an espresso before I came here, so maybe I can do both parts of the story, which is mostly dialogue. If I can't, just pity me. I should have had a double. I was trying to read things too. A few of these stories have been published in magazines, and the other ones that begin the book and that are in the middle of the book and that are at the end of the book follow the book's main character, who's a teenager named Jocelyn. And I have read excerpts from those, but I think somehow, even if it fails, a story that's beginning, middle, and end seems like the way to go. So here's my espresso try with a story called Silent Prayer. Sometimes, he said, I think people would sympathize with me if the roles were reversed and I was a woman whose job required her to travel. Have you thought about it that way, in this time when women have still not gotten the opportunities and respect they should, whereas men, I stand here as a case in point, are criticized for doing what women aspire to do? You'd like me to stay home and help you plan a birthday party for Joshua, which I can do by phone, by sending you an email, by doing anything that might represent my share of the work, but you won't give me a break. It's as though I want to go on every business trip, as though the last flight wasn't a nightmare. I had a headache for 2 days afterwards. Do you have any idea at all where my black Nikes are? Not the Pumas that are mostly black, but the Nikes. I'm sure if we still had your assistant, she could find them. What is that supposed to mean? She's miscarried and she's suffering a major depression. She's called off her marriage. She should be here to locate my shoes? Are you suggesting I'm a monster? What if my wife might know where my favorite shoes are, even if it's a trivial thing to know? Luann called and said she'd kept down both dinner last night and lunch. She can't wait to get back here. If you ask me, which nobody ever does, that soccer player wasn't worthy of her, and this is all for the best. I wonder how other couples talk to each other, he said. I really do wonder that, but there's no way to find out. You can't believe what you see in the movies or on TV or in books, least of all the so-called reality shows. Oh, maybe Roz Chast has some idea. That's about the only person I can think of. I saw a shoe on the back stairs. I have no idea where the other one is. Women don't misplace their shoes. Back stairs, just a minute. She sat on the bed, king size at his insistence, separate reading lights, 2 night tables with identical spherical digital clocks whose alarms chirped a bird call. She had to set hers at the highest volume. Years ago, when she first came to Maine, she'd trained herself to sleep through the sounds of birds and crickets. Now, the sputtering, muffler-missing motorcycles that constantly passed by posed a different sort of challenge: how to resist stringing razor wire across the road. Thank you. They were on the back stairs. One shoe was on top of the other. Women don't stack their shoes, she said. You have a way of turning discussions to the differences between men and women. I don't really think about that all the time, but I always find I have to talk about it. Going back to your earlier point, Hughes would do anything possible to keep you, and if you said you were sick of so much flying, Hughes and the genius aren't on the case the way I am. I agree. Why don't you call Hughes and just say that? I wouldn't stop you. I would, however, be angry if it backfired and he sent me to California even more often. You can have dinner at Perbaco, she said. That almost makes it worth it. He looked at his phone. Text from Luann, he said. She's going to bed. It's not even 4 o'clock. Well, what would you have me do? Text her and tell her to walk around the block and slap her cheeks a few times? Yeah, and communicate all of that with the smiley symbol and lots of exclamation points, she said. I never wanted a king-size bed. The maid hates putting on the sheet. She spends half of her 4 hours here being exasperated with the bed. Even when she gets the contour sheet on, she keeps staring at it like it's a field of smoldering embers. Remember the time you forgot your driver's license and you missed the flight, she said? For about a year, I was convinced you'd done it on purpose, to come home when I least expected it, to see what I was doing. Excuse me? Wouldn't that have required excessive effort, and might that not indicate some paranoia on your part? Remember what I was doing? I was really upset. I thought I'd lost both my Amex and my driver's license, and I knew I could grab my passport, but I guess I was feeling paranoid, like someone might have slipped the 2 most important cards out of, are you stalling for time because you don't remember what I was doing? Jesus, I remember what you were doing. You'd put some grease all over your hair, and you were sitting stark naked on the front porch wearing nothing but a shower cap, except that you dragged out some huge scarf to cover yourself with if anybody walked by, though I don't know how you could be so sure you'd see them, and you were having a cigarette the last year you smoked cigarettes. I was looking at Vogue and drinking a virgin margarita. Why do you bring this up? Because what I do is so innocuous. I spend my time thinking about a party at water country. I can't even plan our son's birthday by myself. I don't know how to be in the world. How can you stand me? I chose you out of all the world. And you keep me by shining that sincere smile on me and constantly implying that men and women are just different. And by managing to convince everybody you're such a good guy because you made your ex-girlfriend from years ago your assistant, even after she had an affair behind your back with Hughes the second she met him. And furthermore, I agree with you. She's a very capable, nice person. A one-night stand is not an ex-girlfriend. And if we might possibly discuss something else, even though Luann is your favorite subject, there's a book, a novel by that writer who wrote that story you love about Bruins. I heard about it on NPR. In the novel, the character's wife is crazed with the desire to have a child and hops a plane when she knows she'll be fertile and goes to where he and a bunch of friends are gathered because an old friend unexpectedly died. I still can't believe we had that crazy time together and went off to that house you'd rented in Marin because you probably thought you'd take some other girl there. And we found that croquet set in the garage and set it up and played a game naked when it got dark. I am quite aware of our history. We have now been married for 9, going on 10 years. We have a wonderful son. I'm not going to apologize for the next 10 years because apologizing for the first 10 has been enough, don't you think? I was having a panic attack. All I said to you and Marin, which I still don't think was crazy, was that we should back off and think about the relationship for a while. What would you have done if Hughes hadn't suddenly appeared on the scene and tempted you to work for his company? I wasn't looking for a job when Hughes got in touch. Were you under the impression that I was? I was actually trying to cut down my hours and build more time into my schedule for tennis. What a prig you sound like. Your tennis time. Anybody would think you were vile. Vile? I can't believe what I hear sometimes, like this is a movie of some stupid rich people's lives. Oh, we're really sorry the lobstermen can't afford to live in town anymore, and it's really too bad about all the businesses going under, or maybe the greenhouse stays open because they sell orchids, which have become the new azaleas around here. And sure, the economy is fucked, but we know all about French wines and fly first class and think about fucking tennis. You yourself have thoughts on tennis? Yes, that it would be better for me than yoga and Pilates and power walks and weights strapped on my ankles. Jesus, we've got to watch out. Okay, you pick up those binoculars and watch out while I'm gone. And if any fashionable sports activities come this way, you hold up a hand and you say, none of that here. I'm not having any kicking, any tackling, any kneeing the other guy in the balls. You keep the house safe. Use the gun in the drawer if you have to keep us safe from sports which have become terminally fashionable in your mind. I now understand. What gun in what drawer? I was kidding. The water pistol Hughes gave Joshua that you confiscated and keep in the kitchen drawer with the steak knives for some reason. By the way, I was looking for an unmatched sock and opened your night table drawer and saw you had quite a bit of new La Perla. Expensive stuff. You love to pretend I'm always spending money. Really, sometimes you say the most ridiculous things. An aversion to tennis, it's too crazy. I don't have an aspersion. She blinked. Why had she said that? The same way she matter-of-factly corrected Joshua, she now corrected herself. An aversion, she said. Then call the coach tomorrow and set up a time. You know I'm not going to do that. You could. You'd hate it if I was all over your territory. It's one of the reasons you left her, isn't it? Because there wasn't anything you didn't do together and agree on. That question cannot be answered, the way you phrased it, I mean. I don't care if I'm childish, she said. I'm trapped in this horrible place with my wicked thoughts and a kid who always mixes up words and uses the wrong one and no money of my own and a job that's just something to pass the time and only you have a key to the wine cellar. A motorcycle passed by, the sound shaking the house. Then came another. Wine cellar, he said, metaphorically speaking. Okay, he said, this is you know what, that G word you never want me to say, and I'm not going to say it. I'm just going to give you a hug and hope you snap out of this mood very soon, even if it means you're starkers on the porch, sipping your non-alcoholic drink that you pride yourself so much for drinking as if I ever thought you were an alcoholic. So come here and we'll embrace, and even though I'm not saying you know what, you know that I'll be back in 3 days and that I love you. She ran into his arms. His travel bag was suspended from a padded strap over his shoulder. It swayed before steadying itself. If he had facial stubble and a tiny lock of dark hair falling over one eyebrow, he could be a Prada ad. Also, if he were 20 years younger. His black Nikes made him look less hip. The rounded toes were all wrong. Their son was still at his play date. The house would be very empty when her husband left. She squeezed him tightly, mashed her nose against his shirt, which somehow smelled of its color, light green. A medium green shirt would have been unthinkable. Might as well wear loafers without socks, or take out a membership at the reading room on the path above the beach. the reading room where the joke was that there wasn't a book in the entire place. They disengaged. He raised a hand. She did the same. From under the bed, the cat poked out his head, then nearly flattened himself to crawl into the room. He walked in a half circle with his tail in the air, white tip flicking. They'd tied a bell to his collar, but the week before she'd found a dead bird in the yard. She heard his footsteps on the stairs, or imagined them. They'd been newly carpeted. Then the front door clicking shut. She waited to hear the garage door. Okay. She heard the car radio and the sound of gravel under the tires in the driveway, then only the wind that blew up. She went to the window and picked up the binoculars and sat there. She raised them to her eyes, already knowing how bright the pink of the sky would appear, how silver the bottom of the tree leaves, pale as the underside of a turtle some nasty boys flipped over so it would be incapacitated, as they laughed and pointed at its scaly legs clawing the air. The cat startled her, brushing her leg. It was feeding time, a bit past it. Feeling time, she murmured, then did a double take and corrected herself. Feeding time, yes. His eyes were all bright desire, but he wouldn't utter a sound. You sometimes heard it other times, but only the most silent of demands was made for the nightly meal. The cat would claw the banister, and his bell collar would tinkle if the request wasn't promptly fulfilled. Across the road was a scene she wouldn't have noticed if the cat's touch hadn't made her lower the binoculars from the sky. A doe and her fawn, the mother hovering as the lanky-legged baby led the way, eating something hanging below the low leaves of a bush. The pair was listening, but the doe was listening more keenly. Oh, how sad is it I have to pump myself up with my own importance, she wondered. Suddenly conscious of her earrings, dangling pearls, she touched them lightly to still them. She swiveled to see the empty room, the ocean-intense span of blue spread across the huge bed, the dresser mirror allowing her to see behind her to the pink sky darkening above whatever scene had been happening before that was now out of sight. Was September deer season? October? Please let the plane not crash, she thought, going weak in the knees. This was a habitual thought, more or less like prayer. Thank you very much. Questions? Half a dozen? Yes?
When were those stories written? I'm sorry. When were those stories written?
Last summer.
Thank you.
Want me to be more forthcoming? I had a couple of them on my computer, a couple of the longer ones, which I've never read because it's 50 minutes to an hour just to read one of them. One was finished, one wasn't finished, and I had no idea of writing a bunch of related stories or stories based in Maine, but I happened to have those too. So then when I wrote The Fledgling, which I believe was the first of the newer short stories, and one other, I did have this little idea in the back of my mind, like, well, I've got 4, let's see how this plays out. Very unusual that I would be on a roll like that, but yeah, I was lucky. Doesn't happen much, believe me. They were certainly revised, but they were written in a heck of a hurry, yeah.
In both of your stories, which are both in your main short story collection,
Mm-hmm.
right? I heard repetition through them of the bird
Yep,
and the word tinkling
yep.
and a couple of things. And in terms of craft, I was curious how purposeful those were, or if they came to you as something you noticed after you wrote it, and it's something that could work as a thread to connect these particular stories.
Well, that is the thing about doing things in rough draft, especially if you're doing them, in the same time period. You tend to grab the same things over and over it. I mean, writing almost becomes like telling an anecdote. Once you tell it one way, it's kind of frozen in time, you know what I mean?
Right.
But that is the editing process. I mean, when you go back, you could very well say, I don't know, just in terms of how you perceived of it, there's too many birds, there's not enough birds, etc. The entire book, though, is about creatures that are endangered. And in another story, in two other stories, maybe 3, there are turtles or there's a tortoise, that does have this happen to it, that is turned on its back and can't right itself by a couple of boys who are playing with it, and then worse yet happens to the turtle. But I was working on purpose, and also it's more also not exactly a game with myself, but these little things, these little markers that keep you going. Many of the stories refer to T.S. Eliot, mostly to the wasteland, sometimes to Prufrock, and so that figured in there too. You know, that figured in early on too, and then there's a reference finally, because of other allusions, on the next to last page to Orpheus and Eurydice, which I was playing with too. So there's a lot of myth certainly underlies a lot of these stories, and I was trying to do variations on a theme. So things like the birds, which you're quite right to notice, were a deliberate kind of unifying principle, and also in the most simple level, they're symbolic of the spirit, right? So
Right.
that idea of, are we grounded in reality? Are we in our own worlds? Are we in the natural world? Or is there something more cosmic? Is an implied question, I hope, of the whole collection.
Right, I mean, they both have a sort of dreamlike quality
Uh-huh.
to them, something that's just, there's a presence, but there's also this sort of other world going on at the same time as this action is going on.
Great.
And that's just me.
And
but-
hell is the recycling bin, right?
Well, yeah, and I'm curious if the cat in the second story had a collar before you began editing and wanted to work with this word tinkling.
Yeah, I
Like, did
did.
you decide that there was a bell on the collar before you noticed the
Sure,
word
because that's
tinkling?
even worse, right? If you try to take care of things and you put a bell on the cat's collar and the cat, it still goes out and kills birds. I mean,
Right.
well, Jonathan Franzen, here I am. I mean, yeah, no, yes, it was there from the beginning. It was there from the beginning. But again, I don't know about these things. I mean, creativity is a mystery to me too. And there are also quite a number of words here, but I only realized this in retrospect when I had some distance. Tinkling itself is a bird that's onomatopoetic, right? It sounds like saying it sounds like the sound it makes, like susurration or something like that, you know. I was aware that I was doing that, yeah. But that's cool if they seem like somewhat dreamlike, because there is a kind of wavering in these stories, as though the character or the narrator or somebody or something even might go out of focus, but because there's so much under the surface, I mean, there's so much being projected and there's so much being kept at a distance, that, you know, I mean, I can see that after the fact. I did tune into that somewhat when I was revising, but didn't seem anything, I mean, it seemed like it might help my cause.
Okay, thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Mhm. I think they're recording this. I could hear you, but.
Okay, I
yeah.
did too. I talked loud. I was touched by both stories with this idea about what is natural, which always seems like such an important story for us, because we somehow think we're supernatural and the rest of the world's natural. So there's this sort of attempted interference with the natural world, and also the torturing, which is this peculiar thing, but it's something that we know. We've all watched cats torture. And so the torturing that the boys do of turning it upside down, but also the torturing that the man and the woman are doing, the husband and wife.
Right.
It's a ritualistic torturing that they're going through with each other for a long time. And so I was just touched at how that story goes across and hits that question, because we see the idea of boys turning a turtle upside down, or leaving the bird to die, or something like that, or this foolish woman with her gloves. And so we see that as a terrible thing, but in a sense, it's just, it's what goes on out there.
No, it's a really
And
nice reading.
I
of
get
it, yeah.
that sense, the way the story is
Uh-huh.
told.
Uh-huh.
There's, it sounds like that. It sounds like a
Great.
description rather than a prescription for behavior.
Great. I mean, one of the things that's interesting to me is not to, you know, to reach for something extraordinary, but to take things that are ordinary. I mean, all of us have seen boys do something like this. All of us, as you say, are quite aware that cats kill birds. I mean, so much so that we're almost numb to it unless we pause for a moment and really consider that and consider the repercussions of that. I'm much more interested, personally speaking, kind of defamiliarizing ordinary things than I am in trying to, invoke the night of the eclipse or something like that happens rarely or whatever, yeah.
A couple more questions?
Have you read Joy Williams' new book? That's her new and collected stories. Go right out and get it.
Okay.
Yeah. Just out this month, Joy Williams. Also, her essays are great. And I think there's only one book of them. It was nominated for the New York Book Critics Circle Award. It's called Ill Nature.
Ooh, nice name.
Oh, it's great. It's really great. Especially the essay in there called Hawk. Really great. Really great. I move over. She wins. Anybody else? No? I knew if I said no, I'd get her. That's a ploy. I used to be a teacher.
Thank you. I'm always fascinated by stories where the place is a character almost. So in these stories, are you aware all the time that Maine itself is saying something, or was it just your editor said you had to have the state named?
I would not have had a subtitle saying Maine Stories,
Unless
but
it were.
the only, it's a punning title. I would not have called the book The State We're In either unless I was punning in the word state, that seems obnoxious. I'm not a diagnostician. But it's funny because I'm quite at odds with where I live. I mean, you really can't say that publicly because you're just excoriated. It's like not wearing the flag pin if you're Barack Obama. You're loathed. Put the pin on. Just end that debate. But really, I mean, the battle cry for Maine above and beyond everything. No, I don't think so. I tried to present a much more neutral Maine so that there's no lighthouse in any of these stories. You just pretty much heard the only mention of lobster, I think, that comes there anywhere. Nobody says you can't get there from here, or whatever's supposed to be so funny. So I wanted to kind of demystify Maine and to say, yes, I mean, I'm very happy if a place comes alive as the background, but to my way of thinking and what I'm personally drawn to, I don't know that I pull it off, but it's like going to the theater and you see the background scenery and it all becomes one. But it's very interesting if you just look at the background scenery and forget something's being acted in front of it and you think, that's just the background scenery, So that says something temperamentally about how I'm likely to go about things, either unless I'm on the road and I'm assigned to write a travel article, then it's somewhat different. But not for the purposes of fiction. So it's a kind of yes and no answer to your question. Mm-hmm. Writing is so mysterious. I can't believe I'm standing up here pretending to know anything about it.
I'm curious why you chose to end the second story, or chose to continue it out of the dialogue. Why did you not just frame it just in the dialogue, because that was really the bulk of it? So what led you to go beyond?
The whole story was trying to get to the deer. Everything was trying to get, and deer is a pun too, right? I mean, I don't want to push it too hard, but let's hope you don't just think literally, oh, deer is a pun or something like that. But really, if you didn't know what the subtext was, you do understand her anxiety and all that kind of thing from the dialogue. You're quite right about that. I mean, I meant that to be the body of the story. But to my way of thinking, even when people discuss something fully, even when there is that much dialogue, which is rather unusual. I mean, it's very rare that we we text each other or something, It's very rare that we talk and talk and talk, and what we're really not saying is, I'm worried you're going to die, and a more ambient anxiety even than that. But that really, to me, wasn't what the story was about. It was that there is another big world out there, and in that world, it would be perfectly logical to see a couple of deer. But for me, the mystery is, what do these humans and what they have at stake have to do with those deer? That is not merely a literary projection on my part. How can I put those two things together and kind of overlap them, That's what's interesting to me, so I would have moved away from dialogue. Well, thank you very much for coming. Thanks. Sincerely, I absolutely love short stories, and I'm sure there are a lot of real readers of short stories. I'm terrible with titles, but there are some really, really good ones out now that I happen to have read this summer. I reread Adam Hazlitt's You Are Not a Stranger Here, and if you haven't read that book, that is a absolutely amazing, truly related book of short stories, not, Maine as backdrop, Maine as demystified. That's an absolutely brilliant book, Adam Hazlitt. And there's another young woman named Claire Vay Watkins who has a book of stories based in the West, some historical, most in the present moment. That's great. Another fabulous book by a guy named Jack Livings, takes place in contemporary China, called The Dog. And Joy Williams's collection too, new and selected. And what did she call? I think she called that The Visiting Privilege or something close to that. Really just a fabulous book. And she's on the road now too. So. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Well, I just want to take a minute to thank everybody. It's been a great festival, 3 days, 40-plus authors, and to end up with Ann Beattie, really special. I don't know, are there volunteers from the festival that are here right now? Please stand up, because you deserve a round of applause. Sandy Rouse left. She's the mover and shaker, but thank you very much. Books for sale, yes. Ann will be over near the windows signing books.